And now I'll turn it back to
Great. Thank you so much, Veronica. And we are going to now do some background pieces on AEBG TAP. I am certain that many of you, because I recognize several of your names, have participated in our AEBG TAP webinars, but just some quick background for you. The AEBG Technical Assistance Project is funded out of the AEBG office, and the Sacramento County Office of Education is the grant holder, contract holder for this project, and they partner with AIR, CASAS, and OTAN to make sure that we are bringing the members of the consortium a variety of tools and opportunities to improve and strengthen the programs and better provide services to our students. AIR in that role focuses on providing technical assistance in the area of instruction, curriculum, and leadership as we work as a partner to support the work of the AEBG Technical Assistance Project. And a little bit about AIR. AIR, our mission is really to conduct and apply the best behavioral and social science research and evaluation towards improving people's lives. And we at AIR have a special emphasis on improving the lives of the disadvantaged. And so our work with the AEBG TAP project really, again, supports the consortia in providing those services to the students who, again, align with our mission. And we are able to provide capacity building for consortia in the areas of improving instruction, curriculum alignment, student support services, transitions to post-secondary and the workplace, ongoing support for student learners with a focus on college and career readiness, and developing exemplary leaders. We are excited about this session because today's agenda will focus on community asset mapping. And during the session, you will learn what that means. We'll be defining community asset mapping, defining assets. The facilitators will talk about considerations that you need to keep in mind as you begin the process of community asset mapping. You'll hear examples from 3 of our facilitators who will be sharing their experiences with the success of community asset mapping in their community building and community development work. And specifically, you'll hear from allies and the work that they've done around community asset mapping with the South Bay Consortium for Adult Education. And then the presenters will share with you the procedures for asset mapping, how to go about doing it, the steps involved. And then we'll follow that with an opportunity to wrap up and to allow you to ask any questions that you have about the process as you begin to get started. So let me now introduce our amazing facilitators. We have this morning with us Deborah, or this morning, I apologize, this afternoon with us, Deborah Jones, who Deborah is works with the Peralta Community College District, and she is currently the Vice President or the Director of Economic and Workforce Development with the Peralta Community College District. Deborah, I gave you a promotion, I think, as Vice President. She most recently served working with the Chancellor's Office in the workforce and adult education area within the California Community College Chancellor's Office prior to that. And she was, before that, working as the State Director of Adult Education for the California Department of Education. Her background includes multiple degrees in social work, educational administration, and a doctorate in organizational leadership. And she has a huge commitment to social justice And it really drives what she does and her work in all areas. And she will be leading us through the discussion today as we talk about community asset mapping with our three amazing presenters. And I'll begin with Ms. Celeste Overton Morris, who comes to us as the director of the Center for Schools and Communities. And that is a training and consulting organization that really looks at improving the education and life outcomes for children and their families. And she's worked extensively in the public and private sector with nonprofits, foundations, state government agencies, and helping them to work collaboratively to build strategic partnerships and lead innovations. She serves on a number of national, state, and local boards and is also the author of several publications. And she's going to bring to us a national look at community asset mapping from her experiences working with the United Way. She has a focus on cultural competence, equity, and educational leadership, and is currently pursuing her doctorate in ed leadership. Our next presenter will be Dr. Jana Karp, and Dr. Karp is a community engagement consultant who works with communities to help them consider an asset-focused situational assessment to addressing their community challenges, needs, or issues. She works now with the Fire Learning Network, which is a cooperative partnership with the Department of the Interior, the Nature Conservancy, and actually the United States Forest Service. And they work in Northern California and rural communities to bring together communities to engage them in identifying how to address issues. She has held academic appointments with a variety of universities, including the Appalachian State University and St. Mary's College. She has her PhD in public policy analysis and multiple other degrees, and is also a fellow of the Natural Resources Leadership Institute. And our fourth presenter will be Ilse Paulette, who is the Executive Director of Allies, the Alliance for Language Learners, Integration, Education, and Success. And Allies, as some of you are familiar with, is a coalition of ESL providers, workforce development boards, public agencies, and community-based organizations in the Silicon Valley area. And Ilse has focused her work for the last 15 years on the intersection of adult education and immigrant integration. She has a huge background as a result of that, focused a lot on foreign language instruction, working with community-based organizations, curriculum development, and adult schools. Currently, in her role, she's working to strengthen the collaborative network that Allies has been the champion of, as well as focusing on further helping Allies with the implementation of the immigrant integration framework across all of Allies partners. So those are our amazing presenters today. Again, leading that conversation for us will be Dr. Deborah Jones. And Deborah, I will turn it over to you at this point to get us started. So thank you very much. Deborah, if you are talking, we can't hear you yet. It's not coming across. We think you might be muted accidentally, so we'll await to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. We could hear you. Now we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Now we can again.
Okay, I'm not certain what's going on. Can you continue? Can you hear me now?
We sure can.
Okay, here I go. I'm honored to be facilitating this conversation with three experts on community asset mapping. When AB 86 was introduced, the legislature charged the adult education community to engage in a needs analysis of the region. $25 million was allocated for this work, and some of you hired consultants to do this. Some of you did it on your own. You examined poverty, literacy, immigration, and other demographics, and you identified gaps in services. You remember that in 2008, dedicated adult education funding had been reallocated by districts to serve the K-12 needs. That was also known as flexibility. During this time, adult education programming was cut drastically around the state and eliminated in some places. The community colleges were also facing budget cuts, and they made significant cuts to their programs. The needs analysis included this information. As the adult education community prepared to implement programming, the state dedicated $500 million to the effort, and practitioners used the data from the needs analysis to prioritize and design programming. You've done an amazing job of serving your communities in new ways with new partners. And yet there are challenges, as the $500 million is not enough to meet all of the needs you identified. And so we look to transform the system. We've moved from planning to implementation and now to transformation. Community asset mapping, looking at the strengths and resources within a community, is key to this transformation. We're going to take a poll. How much experience do you have with community asset mapping? And you have three choices. You have four choices: none, some, a lot, or no vote. So please vote. It looks like most of you have had some experience with community asset mapping. Okay. Thank you for your responses to the poll. Celeste, Jana, and Ilse are going to take us through what I call Community Asset Mapping 101.
Hi, everybody. This is Jana. I'm glad that you're here. Thanks for your interest in asset mapping. Let's start with a little background. Community asset mapping has become well known because of these two men initially, Don McKnight and Jody Kretzmann, who are faculty members in the Community Studies program at Northwestern University. They wanted to learn directly from community members who had experienced success in their own community building. So they visited thousands of communities and they just asked them, what have you done that's been successful in your community that you could share with others? In the stories that they heard, Kretzmann and McKnight recognized common themes that they organized into a specific approach called asset-based community development, or ABCD. They published the guidebook that you see here on the right, Building Communities from the Inside Out. Community asset mapping is one of the strategies mentioned in the book. And the book was so popular that the Community Studies program at Northwestern became the Asset-Based Community Development Institute, which is now at DePaul University. It has 41 faculty practitioners, and there are ABCD research, publications, blogs, events, Facebook pages, and trainings all over the world. You'll see their website in the resources slide at the end of this presentation. Now let's read this definition of asset-based community development. Building on the skills of local residents, the power of local associations, and the supportive functions of local institutions, asset-based community development draws upon existing community strengths to build stronger, more sustainable communities for the future. This is what Kretzmann and McKnight found as the building blocks of successful community action.
Stronger, more sustainable communities were built on collaboration among the many existing strengths that they had. Individuals, groups, and organizations that work together to realize their shared hope for healthy, vibrant, and equitable neighborhoods. Community asset mapping is about recognizing the strengths or assets in a community, strategically connecting them to each other, and then finding and supporting opportunities for them to work together productively. Next, Celeste will talk about how productive it is to focus on strengths.
Thank you, Jana. So Deborah in her opening slide talked about how you've moved from planning to implementation and now moving towards transformation. So in your implementation phase and also your planning stage, you took a look at the needs in a community. And often when looking for systemic changes to occur, the first thing that organizations do is to conduct a needs assessment. And that systematic process for determining and addressing needs or gaps between current conditions and desired conditions or wants. And I was glad to hear Deborah say that you have done that work and you've done it well. And from that needs assessment you have conducted, I'm sure you've identified several gaps in the communities in which you are working. And while identifying what needs the community may have is critically important, it may also be seen as deficit-focused and reliant on external resources in order to fix the problematic needs of the community. So for example, if you look at the map that's identified on the screen, you'll see that the slide is focused on what is needed, and it's often placed in terms of what is wrong with the community. And sometimes we know that human behavior, when you find a problem, you also look for someone to blame for that problem. And I know as great practitioners, that is not your intent. And so we think that through community asset mapping, there's another way to frame the information that you found in your needs assessment in a more positive approach. And that alternative is community asset mapping. So when we talk about community asset mapping, we're talking about a capacity-focused way of engaging and respecting communities. It's a positive approach, and it's often proposed sometimes as a substitute for the traditional needs assessment that you conducted, using problems to formulate human service intervention targets, resources to service providers rather than residents, and sometimes fragments efforts to provide solutions. So when we talk about mapping community assets, in your situation, we're talking about using the information you've already collected in tandem with this community mapping asset. So when you're focused on community asset mapping, you replace conversations about what is wrong in the community with conversations uncovering the hidden talents and gems in the community, the assets, the gifts, the talents, the dreams, the hopes, and fears of individuals in that community. So when we talk about asset mapping, we really think about empowering the community by connecting and mobilizing existing strengths of the community, by building connections inside out, which debunks the myth that only outside resources are needed and that they are better than what already exists in the community or that the community has to offer. It fosters collaboration within a community on its own behalf. Who better to care about the community than the people who are living in it, raising their children in it? And so we really see this process as a way to invite residents of that community to be a part of the solution and not just seen as part of the problem. And finally, community asset mapping is grounded in research and theory. You heard Jana speak earlier about Kretzmann and McKnight, who have studied the issue for more than 30 years. And one of the things that we know is that the participatory action research model that mapping community assets is built on is really a fundamental principle of that continuous learning cycle that we'll talk more about later in the PowerPoint. And I'll be turning it over to Deborah.
Thank you for that overview, Jana and Celeste. Let's begin a deeper dive into defining community assets. Jana, will you lead us off?
Absolutely. So you may recognize these three types of assets from the definition of asset-based community development. So let's get into them a little more because they offer different kinds of strengths. Starting with individuals, just about everyone has something going for them, some gift or talent or skill. Often people expand on their assets when they learn a profession, so you can think about maybe what your strengths are that motivated you to become involved in education or in administration. But each of us has more to offer our community than what we do to make a living. Many of us like to bake or play drums or build things or do art with kids or rescue animals. The asset-based approach teaches us to see each other as multidimensional people with all kinds of gifts, talents, and skills that form a big well of strength that can be tapped in a community. Then the second type of asset is citizen associations, or groups of people who come together around a shared interest because they care about it. These are neighborhood associations, people who walk their dogs together, prayer groups, knitting groups, sports clubs, stuff like that. They're not paid, and the group itself doesn't own anything. What they have is a whole lot of networking capacity among community-minded residents and the ability to get local attention in creative and often inexpensive ways. Then the third type of asset is institutions or formal organizations. These are also groups of people who gather together, but they do so because they're paid to spend their time producing a particular good or service. This includes for-profit, not-for-profit, and government organizations, so that's businesses and service providers and community gardens and schools. What they have to offer is financial resources often, maybe buildings and parking lots, different kinds of supplies, and professional networks that can affect local training and job opportunities. Their community-related strengths are in providing functional support for community well-being. Then here's an example of one kind of community asset map. You can see that it's concentric circles, and each one shows one of the types of assets I just described. The individual skills and talents are in the middle, and then outside that is the informal groups or associations, and then at the very outside are the formal organizations. So you can see that not every asset map is a literal map. There are many ways to graphically represent community strengths. The goal of all of them is to identify assets, to bring them together and help them find ways to work together on things they care about. So what I hope you start to see in this community asset map is the interaction that can occur among the individuals, the groups, and the institutions who share one community. Many of the people who are represented in this map are likely to live in the same neighborhoods, shop at the same grocery stores, and send their kids to the same schools and go to the same parks. Celeste will now tell you about the additional kinds of strengths you can map in a community.
So just drilling a little deeper into the three assets that Jana discussed, especially when you're thinking about the individual, we also think about the cultural and historical assets. And sometimes these assets don't necessarily come to mind at first when you're thinking about the assets in a community. So most of the communities you are serving have a rich culture and history, and understanding communities through their cultural and historic lens is critically important in developing and maintaining robust relationships. When you think about the assets of a community, don't neglect to think about how these assets can be utilized to help the community achieve the outcomes they want to focus on. For instance, how can the tradition of storytelling be seen as an asset in the community Or how can individuals who have maintained their native language be seen as an asset rather than a problem that no one speaks English? I think we also have to understand that the historical assets that exist in community, churches, hair salons, or other places that people gather can be important to sharing what you are working together to accomplish. I think also we can't ignore the historical treatment of marginalized populations and those living in poverty, and being able to recognize the strengths that have been born out of adversity rather than just some of the problems that folks focus on. Economically, I think celebrating the entrepreneurs in a community, their industrious ways that people have figured out how to share their resources. And Jana talked a little bit about land and environment, but we included this photo of a mural as a clear example of a way to think about a landmark or something in a community that can reflect the community coming together and be a positive place for folks to take and turn into something beautiful. So I think really thinking about possibilities and not problems is one of the core things when you think about assets. And now I'll be turning it back to a chat question.
Thank you, Jana and Celeste. You've shared with us unique types of assets that create the fabric of communities. Let's take a moment to chat, folks. Please identify assets in your community that may be a resource to your work. It could be a traditional partner, or it may be something that's unique to the culture of your community. So you can put in multiple responses. Be sure to separate them by a comma. It can be an individual, a group, organization, an institution. It can be the culture that's specific to the community. We've got 3 answers: Goodwill Industries, Library, Housing Department, United Way of Corona, and Crossroads Church. Local America's Job Centers of California, Workforce Development Boards, the libraries, the colleges, the food pantry. These are great assets in the community. Parks and Rec. Office of Immigrant Affairs, and the Office of Immigrant Relations, the YMCA, churches, chambers of commerce. This is great. Thank you so much for your responses. You know, we can learn from each other. We've been given an overview of community asset mapping, and we've learned about the complexity of identifying community assets. Now let's move into the considerations of doing community asset mapping. Jana.
But that was really fun to see all those answers start pouring in. So after you identify community assets, the next step is to connect them together. And this is where people start to create new opportunities just from learning about each other's abilities and capacities. The image on this slide shows a glass half empty and a glass half full. If we concentrate only on what we need, it's hard to get any energy going. And if service providers only look at a community in terms of its needs, the next thought is probably about what outside resources can be brought in to fill up that poor half empty glass. But if they're aware of the community's strengths, which is seeing the glass half full, their next thought may be how to support those strengths so that the community realizes its own potential to fill their glass fuller. People in communities who are aware of their own strengths are empowered by this knowledge. They rely on their proven creativity to work with others for mutual benefit. And then they reach out for additional resources that will help them realize their own homegrown vision. And good person-to-person relationships are vital for this to work. It depends not only on identifying assets in the community, but also the involvement of community-minded, inclusive, and empathetic people who can build and support trust among all the entities involved. Celeste has something else for you to consider.
So when do we use community asset mapping? I like to say when you know that you don't know everything or that you don't know something, when you are looking for the unusual suspects, the non-traditional partners in a community who may be of assistance that don't naturally come to mind. When community engagement has not been to the level of your liking, you've had open houses, community forums, and family literacy nights, and even had food and child care, and still you have had low attendance. Another reason to use it is when addressing community-wide efforts and systemic changes. When you've done all the work that can be done by your organization, like your needs assessment, that you've used census data and GIS mapping, but now you need to know, how does the community see it as a need or a problem? Do they know where the libraries are and what time they open and close? And does that work for them? Is it better to have books at the laundromat in another location as well? You'll learn later that we focused on some literacy in New York City, and that was one of the main reasons that community asset mapping was used, was to really kind of drill down to the brass tacks and understanding where the community saw themselves. And I included this quote: transformation is often more about unlearning than learning. And I think when we talk about conducting needs assessment as practitioners, as social service workers, we like to fix things and know how to do it when we go into the community. And so this process really is about kind of taking all of that away and then listening and learning from the community about how the work should be approached. So it really is advancing from implementation to transformation. And now I'll turn it back over to Jana.
On this slide, there are three figures. The stick figure represents an individual, the circle represents an informal group, and the triangle represents an institution or a formal organization. You remember that these are the three main types of assets, and here I want to talk a little more about how they work together in the asset mapping and mobilization process. The person represents the importance of relationship building. So much of what community development can accomplish, like everything else, depends on good social relationships. Successful asset mapping relates to people as valuable individuals and takes their desire to contribute to the community very seriously, whether it's someone in the office next to yours, a local business owner, or a community member who shows up to an event. The circle represents how informal groups, and I just want to add to a comment about what Celeste said about people who putting on an event when people don't show up. Well, the people who don't show up are also really important. And then the circle represents how informal groups work to build community. The more, the merrier. The circle can always get bigger without changing the structure or focus of the group. It's the center, it's what they care about that holds them together. If adult education is relevant to their central concern, then you will have their attention, and their networking power is very likely to add creativity and inspiration in unique ways that are appropriate to that community's culture. Then the triangle represents the functionality of formal institutions. They're stable, meaning that they can make long-term commitments to the community. They also tend to be hierarchical, and they have complex responsibilities and accountabilities to other institutions and networks that are not as locally based as the informal groups in that community. They also tend to have set agendas because they exist to provide a well-defined service. In that sense, of course, they need customers or clients or students or participants in order to be successful. So what this all boils down to is that anyone involved in a community asset mapping effort should be very aware of what hat they are wearing. In other words, you might be wearing your citizen hat as a member of the community with a gift or skill you want to contribute. Or you might be wearing your professional hat as a representative of an agency that has performance criteria to satisfy. The hat you are wearing will greatly affect your role and how much of the process and outcome you need to manage. In any case, if you're leading the community asset mapping process, it's important to make sure that you have the time and the attention to lead it with respect for the relationship building aspect. Without that, you have only the map and none of the community building. So let's look at a couple of examples of what community asset maps can look like. This one is a map of an individual's assets, and you can see that this person has lots of strengths. Most people do. An individual asset map like this is a great way for people to work in twos to help each other name their assets. Another fun exercise connects people in a group by matching up what each person would like to teach using their assets with others who would like to learn it. This can involve languages, reading, tax preparation, yoga, growing food, and all sorts of things. And then this example, this asset map was drawn by a young person who was asked to identify assets in their neighborhood that related to community health. It shows what we would call institutions, schools, the local library, McDonald's, a daycare, and also a park. Someone else's map might show a certain person's house, a group of trees, maybe a good place to exercise. What I'd like you to understand here is that anyone can draw a map of the assets they value in their neighborhood. And there might be surprises like, why put a McDonald's, a fast food restaurant, on a map of health assets? You'd have to ask the person who put it there. Each element on the map comes with a reason, a story. Mapping assets together as a community involves sharing stories, and that almost always leads to an expanded sense of appreciation for the area. And now I'm going to turn it over to Deborah.
Thank you so much. We're fortunate to have three very different examples of community asset mapping. As you listen to the speakers, think about how your experiences are similar and different, and what you can take from their experiences that will bolster your community asset mapping toolbox. After the next three presentations, you'll be asked to share how you will apply something from what you have learned to your unique situation. Celeste will begin with your story.
Thanks, Deborah. So my story begins with the United Way of New York City reaching out to our organization to support them in their campaign, Read NYC. Read NYC was the United Way's response to the literacy crisis in neighborhoods like Mott Haven and Brownsville, some of the most under-resourced communities in the nation. Their goal was by 2020 that the number of children reading at grade level by third grade in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty in New York City would be reached. Unlike how most traditional projects start off, the United Way conducted the needs assessment, just like you, and they did their research, which showed that children who do not read proficiently by the end of third grade are 4 times more likely to leave school without a diploma than proficient readers. These are statistics that I'm sure you're familiar with in your work and its impact on adult learners. And in neighborhoods like the South Bronx, as many as 9 out of 10 of those third grade students haven't reached this crucial milestone of reading by third grade. So it was really something that was important to their community. When our organization was engaged, we worked with the United Way to help them build a community asset mapping team. They had done some partnership building, but it was primarily with organizations located in the community that were primarily service providers to that community, but not much real representation from the members of the community. So we worked closely with them to help them identify the people from the community who were willing and able to engage in the work, and some who initially didn't necessarily want to be, but we, through our discussions, found out that they were influencers in the community, and so we worked really hard to make sure that they were at the table. One of the strategies we utilized was holding community conversations. We helped community members craft questions and facilitate meetings with other community residents, their neighbors, to find out about literacy, what they knew about it, what resources were available in the community, how they work with their children to promote literacy, etc. We also encouraged the team to do neighborhood walkthroughs, and this was a great project as it elicited young people to take part in the process. So essentially we had groups of 2 to 4 community residents walk around the neighborhood with an electronic device. Some did it with a clipboard and a map, and similar to what Jana showed you earlier. And they really walked around the community and marked locations where they thought were important to help the community achieve the goal of improving literacy. So they identified safe places and spaces where literacy could be promoted, and they also identified any areas that they thought might be harmful or hindrances to literacy promotion. Finally, we helped to train community residents in interviewing techniques, not as fancy as it sounds. For example, letting someone answer a question fully before interrupting, not always sharing your opinion before you get the other person's opinion, and paying attention to body language. And this part was also very amazing to us because it really empowered community residents because they knew these things innately and just needed to be reminded as they went through this process about how important it is for them to do that when interviewing families. So at the end of the contract with United Way, we were able to put together a pretty extensive report, a comprehensive report about what the community's thoughts were about how to improve literacy in the area of Mott Haven. And as a result, several initiatives that were community resident-led occurred. So they had sharing of stories at different individual houses and churches that had not happened. They put books in laundromats and places like that so that kids could read while their parents were doing laundry. So the community asset mapping process really helped to help the United Way achieve its outcomes. And now I'll turn it over to Jana to share her story.
Okay, the example I want to share with you today is some of my current work. The Fire Learning Network, which is a partnership between the Nature Conservancy and the U.S. Forest Service, asked me to help them reach what are usually called low-capacity communities near a national forest in far northern California. So I'm talking about a very rural area. People there tend to be independent and self-reliant, and many are distrustful of government agencies and suspicious of people they don't know, especially people like me who are from outside of the area. The concern of the Fire Learning Network is the catastrophic wildfire threat to people living in these rural communities, which I'm sure all of you have been hearing about since October, if not earlier. The government agencies are overextended with just fighting the fires, and they don't have the resources to work with more than a few private landowners. The Fire Learning Network promotes collaboration among agencies and private landowners to help this situation. But in this area, they didn't have any traction. There weren't any of the usual nonprofits who would normally be their partners. So they hired me to find a way to make meaningful contact directly with some of the communities in the area. And as you might guess, I took an asset-based approach. Instead of approaching the communities as low capacity, although they do have tremendous challenges, I simply tried to find out what community members already knew about fire and using controlled burning. I tried to find out what their level of interest was and what they wanted to do. To start, I just asked people straight-up questions about their experiences that involved fire in their community. And what I heard were stories. And while I was listening to the stories, I wrote down every person, group, and institution they mentioned in a positive way. And every time I interviewed someone, I asked them who else I should talk to. Within 9 months, and I covered 9 counties, I had written down over 400 assets, people, groups, and organizations that had knowledge and experience and passion for helping each other deal with wildfire. This outcome was surprising to my colleagues because they'd been working in the area for years and they never knew the extent of the strength there. They had only been looking at the problems and they hadn't gone very far outside of their professional routine and talked to regular people about what they wanted to contribute. The next step in my work has been to continue an asset-based approach in 2 specific communities. You might remember that after you identify the assets, the next steps are to connect them and help people figure out ways to contribute their strengths to their communities. The photos on this slide that you're looking at show some of that. The photo of the fire pans on the table on the left at the bottom is from a local festival. I knew that the Forest Service wanted to have more meaningful contact with community members, and I had met a Forest Service fire ecologist when he did this particular demonstration at a workshop. So I asked him to present it at the festival. It drew a lot of people, and I saw that the fire ecologist was great interacting with kids. So recently I got him invited to visit the school and share his knowledge about the relationship between forest health, fire, and salmon. This was meaningful to everyone because most of the kids at the school are tribal members, and the salmon's highly significant culturally and ecologically. It's also important because the children's education is very highly valued. And then it was meaningful to the fire ecologist because it made a way for him to start building trusting relationships with the community because, as you know, wherever kids are involved, usually parents are involved also. And I could go on and on. The other pictures are also examples of people coming together and sharing their strengths to create new opportunities. The pictures of the burning piles are on a logger's property who'd given up on using fire to manage his land because there was so much government red tape. But when I asked him to host a group of people and show them what he knows on his property, he was delighted. 12 new projects are developing as the result of the conversations that happened on that day. Both state and federal people and private landowners were there. They realized that they are actually on the same page with what needs to happen and that they need each other to make it work at a big enough scale to really matter. And they enjoyed being together, which makes it easier for them to stay in touch. Again, in this project, it's really evident that good relationships multiplied by community strength leads to creative action. The one thing I want to call your attention to is how these activities are occurring within the particular culture and social networks and available resources of this community. This was something new for me. So that document in the middle of the slide is the community asset map that I put together for one of the communities. It's really an inventory of all the assets I heard about in the stories they told me. And what happened was I gave it to a few community members, and they got right into looking at who was on it and who ought to be added and where the surprises were. And I thought they'd want to sit down together and do some more community asset mapping because that's what I've done before. But they didn't want to. They want to mobilize their strengths in their own ways. And I came to understand they don't want to organize. They don't like to go to meetings, and they don't want to work on documents. But they do show up for each other when needed. So what has been working for me is to pay really good attention, to reflect their strengths back to them, and push them a bit to share their interest in fire with each other. And my job right now is to encourage people to use their interest in fire to cross social and cultural boundaries and start working together, and it's happening. And now Ilse will tell you about her work with community asset mapping and allies.
Thank you, Jenna and Celeste, and hi everyone. As I'm listening to this presentation, I'm already taking note of a couple of things that were shared that I know I will be able to apply in my work and in the communities that are served by allies. I was invited to contribute to this webinar to give you all an example of how one AEBG consortium, the South Bay Consortium for Adult Education in San Jose, used asset mapping to think about the services they provide and to position itself as a more intentional community partner. For those of you who are not familiar with Allies, we are a nonprofit organization based in Silicon Valley. Our mission is to support English learner adults in achieving success in their educations, careers, and communities. We are a multi-sector coalition of ESL providers and other organizations that touch the lives of English learners, such as workforce development boards, legal service providers, refugee resettlement agencies, and social service providers. One of our key program areas and a guiding document for allies in the last couple of years is our immigrant integration framework that was developed in partnership with our community partners and was published by allies last year. Basically, we wanted to know what immigrant integration is and how we can measure it. So in doing so, we have identified 8 goal areas of immigrant integration, not just learning English and finding a job, but also providing for your children and family, building your economic security, taking care of your credentials and residency, and participating in civic and community life. We have added some metrics to each of those 8 goal areas so that we can measure people's progress as they advance in their pathways towards immigrant integration. If you have not heard about this project or read the white paper, I encourage you to download it on the Allies website. There is a link included on the resources list on one of the last slides of this presentation. A core principle of our framework was that it is asset-based. So that's an echo of what you heard on this webinar. We did not want it to be a deficit model where we only look at what immigrants need to be successful, but we wanted to make sure that we build on what immigrants bring to our communities and not just focusing on their needs and how we can fill in the gaps. In doing so, the framework can be used as a two-way assessment tool. It can be used to measure progress at the individual level, being a scan of how someone is progressing towards integration of an individual, but it also can be used as an assessment of a community's ability to serve immigrants and to make sure that they touch all of these 8 goal areas of immigrant integration. So our concrete implementation project with the South Bay Consortium for Adult Education is really about looking at the consortium's operations through the lens of immigrant integration. We will be looking at how the consortium connects with community organizations. We'll be looking at curriculum, what happens outside the classroom. We will be looking at data, and we will be looking at stakeholder engagement. And the reason why the consortium engaged in this work was because they have a true desire to become a real community partner, one that is not siloed into its own operations, but that is intentionally seeking out connections to other entities and organizations that serve the same people. They know that their students are someone else's clients, and we're all serving the same population. So in wanting to be a real partner, they don't want to just check off a box of partnerships and engaging with community organizations, but really want to build partnerships that are mutually beneficial to all involved and that help move the needle on the success of the individual served, which in this case are immigrants, refugees, and English language learners. So the first step in this process for us was to do an asset map so that we could know who in the community is doing what kind of services. So what you see here is our interactive map, and it's a literal map with markers for service organizations. We use a service called ZMaps. That's a free online resource to build this map. It's kind of like a Google map where you add markers, and for each marker you can add contact information, a link to a website, and some basic information about the organization. This project started about 3 years ago when Allies was mapping out ESL providers in the South Bay region in Santa Clara County, and so now that we're working on immigrant integration, we have expanded this map to include immigrant integration service providers that are aligned to the framework. So you will see those different colored markers. They all correspond with one of the 8 goal areas in the framework. There's a link to this interactive map also on one of the last pages of the presentation so that you can take a look. It's accessible to everyone online. Based on this map, we have also built a database, which is an Excel spreadsheet of all these service providers, again aligned to the 8 goal areas of the framework. This database will mostly be used as an internal tool by consortium members. And we have also partnered with a website operated by Santa Clara County called immigrantinfo.org. Again, they are using our framework to reorganize and restructure some of the pages on their website so that immigrants can easily find the resources that they need. So next step for our project is to use the asset map as a tool, both the interactive map and the database for the staff of the South Bay Consortium. The South Bay Consortium has 9 transition specialists total, 1 at each of their member institutions. And those transition specialists are the ones who help connect students to the next step in their education, but they also help students connect with wraparound services out in the community. If they know that somebody needs legal services, they can put in a referral to a legal service provider out in the community so that together we can help that individual advance. So the framework and the asset map can be used as a referral tool and as an assessment tool. We will be delivering some professional development for South Bay Consortium staff later in the year. Consortium staff that will be working with the asset map is not limited to transition specialists. We also envision support staff and teachers and administrators to be using the map in their daily activities. Also in this year, starting in 2018, we will be working on a referral pilot. This will initially be a pilot with a limited number of service providers in a very localized geographical area. This is because we know that many of our students have transportation barriers, so they may not make it to service providers that are outside of their zip code. So we're focusing these pilots in a small geographical area with a limited set of service providers. The pilot will include 1 adult school, 1 community college, and then a set of community-based organizations that offer services in 1 or more of the goal areas of the framework. In doing so, we want to build a no wrong door model, a no wrong door system where whenever somebody enters the system, they have access to all services offered at any of the partner organizations. And this is set up to be a reciprocal referral pilot so that students or clients can easily move back and forth between service providers and that there's a system of shared case management so that we can track what happens to a person when they get referred to a partner agency. So this is all very promising work, and we're excited to engage in it and to share our progress with you as we learn more. Our asset map will be shared with the Santa Clara County Office of Immigrant Relations and the San Jose Office of Immigrant Affairs because when you're doing an asset map of immigrant integration service providers in your region, it's not just an internal document that can be used by a consortium, by schools or colleges. It's something of interest to other organizations in the community. And these public offices of immigrant relations and immigrant affairs are key partners in our work. They help maintain and build the asset map and connect us with new partners. All of this, we know that our asset map is a work in progress, that it will need updating and maintenance, and again, that's a key opportunity for us to partner with others and make sure that there is shared ownership of these maps. We know that we will have to have a great degree of flexibility in the implementation of it and in the use of the framework and all the asset maps. So I want to thank you all for listening in. If you want to learn more about the framework or take a closer look at the asset map, again, there are links in the final slides of this document, and I'd be happy to connect you with colleagues or try to answer your questions if you have any. So I'm going to turn it back over to Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for these powerful examples of community asset mapping. We've heard from the three experts in community asset mapping, and they've shared theory, tools, processes, and stories. Take a moment to share in the chat how you would apply something that you've heard today to your own situation. So each of the three stories had some common threads in them and common foundational pieces as far as respecting the community and looking in unexpected places for assets. How would you apply something from one of the stories to your own situation? And just go ahead and type in. Okay. So Paul writes that he's going to use a strengths-based approach to learning more about case management referral systems of partner or other organizations that may serve AEBG students. And Amy's talking about a program that they implemented amongst service providers for case management. There's a lot of relationship building that goes on. Going to check out ZMaps. Good for you, Kristen. And a method of asking, who else should I talk to? And Karen writes that she's reminded to engage the actual community and look beyond the usual potential partners. I think that's just such a lesson for all of us, finding those partners in unexpected places and those diamonds in the rough that are really gems as we insert ourselves into a community and value the people and the organizations that exist. Okay, thank you for those examples. Some of you are continuing to type. Go ahead. And Amy talks about connecting the dots. Such a big job, such an important job. Okay, moving forward. Thank you so much for your responses. The next chapter of today's webinar is what I term the how-tos or the essentials of asset mapping, and Celeste will begin this section.
Thank you, Deborah. So we've received a lot of information about community asset mapping. And like Elsa, I want to offer any of you who have questions that might require a longer conversation, feel free to contact me. All of our information will be at the end of the presentation. We've mostly focused today on how community asset mapping can be used as a tool to strengthen your programs. We knew that it would not be possible to cover the whole entire process of community asset mapping, and as such, just decided to pull out some of the key learnings for you. Some of the nuances that come along with the process to community asset mapping are what I really want to be able to communicate to you through this slide. So there on the slide you see plenty of steps, but talking about earlier about the transformation, that being the process of learning and unlearning and learning, each of these steps also has a myriad of questions, implications, and consequences. How will you do it? Who will do it? Who will pay for it, right? And what will we do if it doesn't turn out the way we planned? So one of the things I want you to remember is that whatever the answers are, that they'll be different for every community, which is why it is so important to allow the community to help you get those answers to the questions. And so if that's the one takeaway you can get from this slide, is that, you know, the steps are one thing, but the nuances are another. So, you know, feel free to be able to explore in between the lines. And now I'll be turning it back over to Jana, I believe.
Yes, sometimes it's, you know, it's great to start community asset mapping with local partners, but sometimes we need to find out more about a neighborhood or a community that we're not familiar with to make sure we're starting off on the right foot. So you can use a simplified community asset mapping process to meet new people and to find organizations and businesses and key events that are related to what you're interested in. And I think I can tell from the previous comments that this is, some of you are already thinking this way. It's going to sound familiar. So a good place to start, if you don't know people already, is with informal interviews. You can think of them as a way to prepare to collaborate successfully. When you listen to people's stories, as you know, you learn about their strengths, but you also find out about agreements and disagreements and how people tend to interact with each other. For these interviews, it works really well to meet somewhere that's neutral, somewhere that's in the neighborhood of the person you're meeting with, and not in your office and not in their office. You can buy them coffee, which is a way to appreciate their time, but it also shows your interest in the area and your willingness to invest in a local business. I usually start by asking open-ended questions like, what got you interested in adult education? What do you like about what you're doing? Or, this is a good one, is there a challenge that you met in a successful way? And then the more they talk and the better you listen, the more successful this first stage of relationship building will be. You'll probably find out that they mention specific assets, the people, groups, and organizations, places, cultural resources, events that are elements in their success or in their enjoyment of their work, which is also really important. You write those down because those may be the people that you want to meet next or the places that you want to check out. I look especially for people I want to work with, people who give me energy and inspiration, people I feel I could count on, and people who share my values like collaboration and transparency. And I also think it's important to meet and spend time with people who are not professional colleagues. You might meet the owner of a restaurant with a community room that's available for evening childcare, or a high school student who taught her uncle to read, or a Rotary Club member with a great outreach method at fairs and festivals. Any of these people could be current or future leaders in their communities looking for opportunities to share their gifts and talents and resources. And then if you ask them at the end of the interview who else you should talk to, like Kristen just mentioned, you get introduced into the live community networks that they use and that they value. And in my work, I found it really important when establishing these new relationships to be personal. more than professional. I mean, not to be professional, but to come across with someone as a full person, to try to make a real human connection through being interested in their stories. It hasn't worked for me to tell my stories in a first conversation or to discuss my own perspective on an issue. It's worked much better to concentrate on understanding them and listening deeply. And then if all goes well, you'll have more opportunity to share another time. And sometimes I found you have to work at getting someone to focus on positives rather than continually diagnose and discuss problems. Asking, what would you like, who would you like to work with, if you were going to work on that can help. And also, if you can reflect back to them what you've heard from them as strengths or assets, you'll be helping them see that glass half full world of possibility. And back to Deborah.
Deborah, you may be muted again. We can't hear you.
Okay. Community asset mapping is built upon the foundation that wherever you look, there are resources to be valued. These guiding principles will ensure your success. Do your homework. Be prepared. Understand the community before you go into the community, but don't make assumptions. Everyone matters. This is so important. Looking in unexpected places, discovering the good, the value in each person. Everyone matters. And it's not about you. Wherever we go, we leave a footprint. And we don't want to leave our footprint. What we want to do is to know intimately their footprints. So it's really about the folks and that community that where you're doing the asset mapping. Think big, start small, and go slow. Community asset mapping is a process. It's deliberate, it's strategic, and like all of our presenters said, enjoy it. It's a wonderful opportunity to learn. So there are implications, there are intentional and unintentional implications that we learned about. There are ethical implications. We look at people, we look at organizations, we look at the history, the fabric, we look at the tapestry of that community. Remember that community asset mapping is foundational to transformation, and that's really about the work that we are doing today. It's transformation. This page, these are resources and references. They were referenced in the webinar, and you can go back afterwards as this will be posted and check them out. And finally, we've come to the very end. What questions do you have for us? This is your opportunity to ask each of the presenters different questions. If comments or concerns, folks are here to give you guidance, wisdom, encouragement. Amy, you're so welcome. I learned today. It's wonderful to have great presenters. Anyone have any questions for general or specific? Okay. Well, this is a great question. This is from Paul. Seems like asset mapping approach is about relationship building, and that takes time. Can you talk about doing this on a timeline? Seems like going slow is the way for this. Jana, Celeste, or Ilsa, want to step in here and answer questions about timelines and building relationships?
This is
This is
Jana.
Celeste. I think I'll give you the, oh, sorry, Jana. I think I'll give you the proverbial answer, which is it depends, right? So from the work that you've already done in your communities with the needs assessment and building the relationships that you've already established, this is really, I mean, for us, our work was really around connecting people together. So leveraging, those relationships that you have with people who have relationships with other people in the community. So once we were able to do that, the work went pretty quickly. And again, it depends on what the focus is. Jana's work is, very focused on fire prevention, and I'll let her give you her perspective. But because the work that we had was very time sensitive in terms of, what is in the community that will help to promote literacy achievement by grade 3, we were able to get most of that work done within a year. There you go.
Thanks. Yeah, this is a really important question because often organizations have a timeline and communities of informal groups and don't have a timeline. But I agree that going slow is a really important consideration, and so to capture pieces of the process for a timeline so that you can report on those pieces and what has happened to date is a good way to at least deal with it formally. Although one of the difficulties, because I'm not going to say anything that's going to resolve the problem of the fact that this is a very slow process to actually build relationships, and it completely depends on the situation because it's an emergent kind of thing. You don't know once you get people connecting and started talking with each other, you don't exactly know what might happen, and you need to be open to different kinds of opportunities. And those are sometimes hard to anticipate, although they are valuable. So I think one important thing to think of in this situation is that if your asset mapping process starts to get people talking to each other in different ways, then that doesn't stop when your timeline stops. It is likely to keep going, and you can kind of check into it and see how it's going, or see what kinds of other things it may have started, because if it's truly successful in terms of engaging people and engaging their capacities and helping them feel empowered and like they can do things, then those things are just going to happen.
And Paul talked about leveraging relationships. There are relationships in place that we can look to leverage more actively. Good food for thought. Yes, it has. The entire webinar has been great food for thought. And seeing no more questions.
Thank you, Deborah, Ilsa, Jana, and Celeste. I really appreciate you guys. I know all of us at the CAP project really appreciate you guys doing this and having this really wonderfully well-rounded conversation that hits so many target areas, so we really appreciate that. Just a reminder that there will be a survey once we close out this webinar, and we really value your opinion and want to hear from you. And so if you could please fill out that survey once we close out. The contact information for the facilitators and presenters today is listed on the final slide. All this information is found in the handouts section on the bottom that you can download, or you can view it on the AEBG TAP webinar website, and that will be posted later on today. Thank you guys so much for being with us today. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you again to all of our presenters.